Imagine walking into a dimly lit basement in the heart of Moscow's concrete jungle, where the walls sweat with the steam of boiling bones and the chef is currently screaming at a piece of sourdough. For years, the global elite laughed at Russia's new wave chefs. They called them street thugs with spatulas, eccentric madmen obsessed with fermenting moss and charring elk hearts in the middle of a skyscraper district. They were the punchline of every joke in the Parisian culinary circles, until the first bite was taken. Now, the laughter has died down, replaced by the frantic scratching of pens as the world's harshest critics scramble to figure out how these urban outcasts just dismantled 3 centuries of French tradition. Before we dive into the blood, smoke, and sheer brilliance of the revolution that changed fine dining forever, drop a comment below and let us know. Where in the world are you watching from? Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never look at a plate of food the same way again. The story of the great Russian culinary shift doesn't begin in a rolling vineyard or a quiet countryside cottage. It begins in the neon-soaked, smog-heavy arteries of Moscow's Arbat district, where the skyline is a jagged teeth row of glass and steel. In the early 2010s, the city's dining scene was a bloated, gaudy corpse of 90s excess, filled with overpriced sushi and Italian pasta made by people who had never seen the Mediterranean. Enter Ivan and Dmitry, 2 chefs who looked more like underground MMA fighters than Michelin hopefuls, operating out of a kitchen that was essentially a converted garage wedged between a nightclub and a high-rise construction site. While the oligarchs were busy ordering gold leaf steaks, these 2 were scavenging for forgotten ingredients like sea buckthorn and birch sap in the urban periphery, convinced that the future of flavor lay in the grit of the city rather than the polish of the West. They were mocked relentlessly by the local press, dismissed as eccentric hobos who were trying to sell poverty on a plate, but they didn't care because they were busy weaponizing the very elements the city had discarded. In those early days, the heat in their kitchen was suffocating, a literal pressure cooker where the duo experimented with techniques that bordered on the occult, using industrial centrifuges and ultrasonic baths to extract the essence of charred timber and rainwater. They weren't just cooking. They were performing a sort of urban alchemy, attempting to distill the soul of a sprawling, cold metropolis into a multi-course tasting menu that felt like a punch to the jaw. The fine dining establishment viewed them as a viral infection, a pair of weirdos who served bread made from fermented pine bark and butter infused with the scent of a summer thunderstorm over Red Square. Critics would walk into their 12-seat concrete bunker, see the graffiti on the walls and the chefs wearing grease-stained black hoodies, and immediately write them off as a temporary fad fueled by hipster irony. But the irony was lost on Ivan and Dmitry, who were working 20-hour shifts, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning resentment for the velvet curtain restaurants that dominated the city's skyline. The turning point came during the Great Frost of 2016, a winter so brutal that the city's supply chains collapsed, leaving the high-end French bistros without their imported truffles and Wagyu beef. While the luxury spots were shuttering their doors or serving mediocre frozen substitutes, Ivan and Dmitry thrived, utilizing their massive stockpile of fermented roots, pickled spruce tips, and salted meats they had spent years aging in the humid shadows of their basement. It was during this period of urban isolation that the city's elite, desperate for a decent meal, finally descended into the concrete lair of the Eccentrics to see what the fuss was about. What they found wasn't just food. It was a sensory explosion that mirrored the chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying energy of Moscow itself, served on shards of slate and broken ceramic. The signature dish, the concrete rose, a beetroot slow-roasted in hot ash for 12 hours until it took on the texture of prime rib, became an overnight sensation that redefined what luxury could mean in a city under siege by the elements. Word began to spread through the underground telegram channels and secret food blogs that something dangerous and delicious was happening in the shadows of the skyscrapers, attracting a new breed of diner who valued authenticity over white tablecloths. Suddenly, the Eccentrics weren't just weirdos. They were the vanguards of a movement that sought to reclaim the Russian identity from the suffocating grip of European imitation. They started hosting blackout dinners where the lights were cut and guests ate in the glow of industrial heat lamps, forcing them to focus entirely on the jarring textures and radical temperatures of the food. The flavor profiles were aggressive, smoky, acidic, and deeply earthy, challenging the palate in ways that made traditional French sauces seem like baby food in comparison. This wasn't about comfort. It was about the raw, unyielding power of the urban environment, and for the first time, the wealthy youth of the city felt like they were eating something that actually belonged to them. As their fame grew, so did the intensity of their methods, with Ivan and Dmitry traveling to the industrial ruins on the city's edge to harvest wild herbs growing through the cracks of abandoned factories. They were obsessed with the idea of urban terroir, arguing that a mushroom grown in the shadow of a power plant had a unique mineral profile that told the story of the modern world more accurately than any forest-grown variety. This claim sent shockwaves through the culinary world, with scientists and traditionalists calling their practices reckless and gastronomic nihilism. But the results were undeniable. Their factory floor broth, a clarified consommé made from roasted bones and distilled scrap metal minerals, perfectly safe, they claimed, was hailed by one rogue critic as the most complex liquid ever served in a bowl. The mockery started to turn into a nervous, quiet observation as the international community began to realize that these two weren't just playing around. They were building a new language of food. The global breakthrough occurred when the head of the world's 50 best restaurants list made a secret visit to Moscow, expecting to find the usual gold-plated trash but instead being led into the Eccentrics' basement at 2 a.m. He was served a 22-course menu that included snow on asphalt, a dish of goat milk sorbet, charcoal crumble, and distilled rain, which reportedly left him in tears of both confusion and joy. Within weeks, the Urban Garage was featured on every major food magazine's cover, framed not as a curiosity, but as the epicenter of a global shift toward post-industrial cuisine. The very critics who had laughed at their black hoodies and concrete walls were now flying across the world to wait in line for a chance to eat a fermented turnip. Ivan and Dmitry remained unimpressed by the fame, refusing to move to a more prestigious location and instead using their newfound wealth to buy more advanced laboratory equipment and a fleet of urban foraging vans. This newfound global spotlight didn't soften their edge. If anything, it made them more radical as they began to incorporate the sounds and smells of the city into the dining experience itself. They installed high-fidelity speakers under the tables that vibrated with the low-frequency hum of the city's metro system, synchronized with the serving of specific courses to enhance the urban tension. Diners were no longer just eating, they were being integrated into the machine of the city, experiencing the frantic pace and the industrial soul of Moscow through every bite. The fine dining world was forced to reckon with the fact that these eccentrics had tapped into a primal, modern energy that made traditional luxury feel dated, dusty, and irrelevant. The revolution wasn't just about the food on the plate. It was about the environment, the politics of sourcing, and the refusal to bow to the expectations of an aging, Western-centric elite. The duo's influence began to seep into other major cities, with young chefs in London, New York, and Tokyo ditching their white jackets for tactical vests and focusing on their own urban landscapes. This was the Moscow effect, a realization that the most interesting flavors weren't in the pristine wilderness, but in the heart of the concrete jungle where life is fast, dirty, and resilient. Ivan and Dmitry became the reluctant icons of this movement, though they spent most of their time ignoring interview requests to perfect their oil-slick scallop, a dish that used squid ink and essential oils to mimic the iridescent sheen of a puddle on a city street. Their defiance was their brand, and their brand was a middle finger to anyone who thought fine dining had to be polite or pretty. They proved that beauty could be found in the grit, and that the most eccentric ideas are often just the ones that are 10 years ahead of their time. By 2018, the Eccentrics had officially redefined the Russian culinary landscape, leading to a surge of neo-urban restaurants opening in the shadows of Moscow's skyscrapers, each trying to outedge the last. But Ivan and Dmitry were already moving on to their next phase, zero-input gastronomy, where they attempted to cook using only the waste products of the surrounding city blocks. They partnered with local bars to turn citrus peels into bitters, used old coffee grounds as a substrate for growing rare mushrooms, and even distilled the steam from a neighboring laundromat to create the scent of the street cocktail. This wasn't just about being green, it was about the total dominance of the urban environment, showing that a chef's creativity was the only ingredient that truly mattered. The fine dining world watched in awe as they turned literal trash into dishes that were being sold for $300 a plate, proving that value is entirely a matter of perspective. The climax of their journey came when the Michelin Guide finally announced it was coming to Moscow, an event that many thought would be the ultimate validation for the Eccentrics. However, in a move that stunned the industry, Ivan and Dmitry released a manifesto stating they would refuse any stars awarded to them, claiming the Michelin system was a relic of a colonial past that couldn't comprehend the soul of the city. This act of defiance only made them more legendary, as the guide ended up giving them 2 stars anyway, which the chefs reportedly used as coasters in their staff break room. The eccentric tag was gone, replaced by genius, though they still preferred urban scavengers, maintaining their gritty aesthetic even as they became the most sought-after reservation on the planet. Their story became the blueprint for how to win by refusing to play the game, a lesson in authenticity that resonated far beyond the walls of their kitchen. Today, the basement in the Arbat district is still there, but it has expanded into a multi-level laboratory of sensory exploration, where the next generation of Russian chefs is being trained in the art of the urban revolution. The city around them has changed too, with the gaudy sushi spots being replaced by smaller, more intense eateries that focus on local fermentation and industrial-inspired presentation. Ivan and Dmitry's influence is everywhere, from the way menus are written to the aggressive, bass-heavy playlists that now define the modern dining atmosphere in Moscow. They took the mockery, the laughter, and the isolation of being eccentric, and turned it into a shield, protecting their vision until the rest of the world was ready to see it. Fine dining is no longer a French monologue. It is a global conversation, and the loudest, most interesting voice in that room is currently wearing a hoodie and smelling of wood smoke. As we look at the legacy of these unorthodox chefs, it's clear that their impact wasn't just on the food, but on the very psychology of what it means to be a creator in the 21st century. They showed that you don't need a pedigree, a massive budget, or the approval of the old guard to change the world. You just need a perspective that is unapologetically your own. The Moscow New Wave is a testament to the power of the urban environment to foster innovation through adversity, proving that the harshest conditions often produce the most refined results. The skyscrapers of Moscow stand as silent witnesses to this revolution, towering over the basement kitchens where the future of flavor is still being fermented in glass jars. If you ever find yourself in the Arbat, look for the steam rising from a nondescript metal door. Inside, you might just find the best meal of your life, served with a side of city grit. The ripple effect of their success has also forced a massive re-evaluation of Russian culture on the global stage, moving it away from the cliched images of vodka and caviar and towards something much more complex and modern. Fine dining became a soft power tool, a way for the city's youth to project their sophistication and their rebellion to a world that often saw them through a singular, outdated lens. The Eccentrics gave the city a new voice, one that was articulated through the medium of taste and texture, and in doing so, they created a sense of pride that hadn't existed in the culinary scene for decades. It turns out that the most radical thing you can do in a world of imitation is to be exactly who you are, especially if who you are is a madman in a basement with a plan to feed the world moss. Reflecting on the unorthodox journey, we see that the term eccentric is often just a placeholder for unfamiliar, used by those who are afraid of change to diminish those who are leading it. Ivan and Dmitry didn't change their food to suit the critics. They waited for the critics to develop the palate necessary to understand their food. This shift in the power dynamic, where the artist dictates the terms to the observer, is the hallmark of every great revolution in history, whether it's in painting, music, or the culinary arts. The city didn't break them. It made them, providing the raw materials and the relentless pressure required to forge something truly indestructible. They are the kings of the concrete jungle, and their throne is built on a foundation of fermented turnips and charred elk hearts. So, the next time you hear about a creator who is being mocked for their weird ideas or their unorthodox methods, remember the two chefs in the Moscow basement who changed everything. Fine dining will never be the same, and the urban landscape will forever be seen as a pantry rather than a wasteland, thanks to the vision of those who were brave enough to be called eccentric. The taste of madness turned out to be the most sane thing in the world. A return to roots, even when those roots are growing through a sidewalk in the middle of a metropolis. Their story is a reminder that the most revolutionary flavors are often found in the places we've been taught to ignore, waiting for someone with enough eccentricity to bring them to the light.